The email came to the shared laptop we kept on the kitchen counter. It was from a hotel loyalty program. One of those automated confirmation summaries that gets sent after a stay, a digital receipt with the room type and the dates and the points earned. I was sitting at the counter eating lunch, and the notification banner appeared at the top of the screen, and I read it the way you read things that appear in front of you before you've decided whether you want to see them. The hotel was in Boise. We live in Boise. The stay was for 2 nights. The dates were a Thursday and Friday 6 weeks ago, the same Thursday and Friday that Claire had told me she was in Portland for a bachelorette weekend for her friend Vanessa. The name on the loyalty account was Claire's. I sat at the kitchen counter with a sandwich I'd stopped eating, and I looked at the notification for a long time. The email had routed to the shared laptop because we shared an iCloud account. We'd set it up years ago, back when we first moved in together, for convenience. The way couples set up shared accounts for convenience without thinking about what convenience means in every direction. 6 weeks ago, I proposed to her on the rooftop of a restaurant on 8th Street. She cried. She said yes before I'd finished the sentence. Her hands were shaking when I put the ring on her finger, and I thought, this is the right thing, and we both know it. 6 weeks ago, I pushed the sandwich away. I opened the email. I read it completely. 2 nights. A hotel I knew. A nice one, downtown. The kind of place you go when you want the stay itself to be the point. The loyalty account had earned 420 points. I closed the laptop. I sat in our kitchen in Boise, Idaho, and I thought about Portland and Vanessa's bachelorette and 420 points, and I thought about a name I'd been trying not to think about for the better part of 4 months. His name was Derek. My name is Will. I'm 34. I coach high school football, offensive coordinator at a school on Ustic Road out in the northwest part of the city, have been there for 7 years. I played through college, got my teaching credential, spent a year in the classroom before I realized what I actually wanted was to be on the sideline, and I've been on the sideline since. It's not a job that makes you rich, and it's not a job that makes you famous, but I've had kids go on to play at good programs, and I've had kids who were never going to play anywhere come back years later and tell me what the program gave them. And I find both of those things equally meaningful, which I think means I'm probably doing it right. Her name is Claire. She's 31, works as a graphic designer at a branding studio in the North End, small agency, 6 people, good clients, the kind of shop where everyone does a little of everything, and where the work is creative enough to be interesting and demanding enough to be real. She'd been there for 4 years, had built a reputation within the studio for a specific quality of precision that the other designers apparently envied and the clients always noticed. She had an eye for things. The apartment we shared on Crescent Rim Drive looked the way it looked because of her. The specific color on the walls that I'd have never chosen, and that turned out to be exactly right. The furniture placed in ways that felt natural, but that I understood, once she'd explained the thinking, had been deliberate and considered. She made things look better. It was her gift, and she knew it. We met in 2020 at a friend's backyard thing during that particular summer when backyard things were the only things happening. A small gathering, careful, the cautious social life of a year that didn't have many other options. A mutual friend had invited us both, and I ended up standing near the cooler at the same time as Claire, which is the kind of proximity that either leads somewhere or doesn't, and in this case it led somewhere. She had a specific quality I noticed immediately. She listened in the complete way, the way that makes you feel like what you're saying is the only thing in the room. I talked too much that evening because of it, and I've been trying to correct for it ever since. We dated for 2 years and moved into the apartment on Crescent Rim at the beginning of 2022. The apartment had a view of the canyon. Boise is built on the edge of the high desert, and if you're in the right part of the city, you can see the rimrock from your window, the specific geology of the place visible in the skyline. And we had one of those windows, and I'd loved it from the first time I'd stood at it. Claire had put a chair specifically in front of it, a reading chair she'd found at a shop on Myrtle Street, positioned so the light from the canyon came over your left shoulder, and the view was right there when you looked up. I'd sat in that chair probably 200 times. I thought about it every time I drove home. 2.5 years in the apartment. I'd been planning the proposal since January, had bought the ring in February, had carried it in a box in my winter coat pocket for 6 weeks because I was waiting for exactly the right moment and kept finding reasons why the current moment wasn't it. My assistant coach, Terrell, who knew I was going to propose because he'd been present when I'd made the phone call to her parents in December, had started asking every Monday morning with the specific patience of someone who has run out of it. Did you do it yet? 6 weeks of no. And then the Saturday in March when the restaurant on 8th Street had a rooftop that was just warm enough and the light was right, and I finally stopped finding reasons. She cried. The hands. The yes. My flaw. I'm going to name it clearly because it's relevant. Is that I'm a coach, which means I'm someone who builds plans and executes them, and is deeply uncomfortable with ambiguity. Off the field, in the parts of my life that don't have playbooks, I sometimes don't know what to do with information that doesn't fit a clear framework. When something doesn't resolve into something actionable, I tend to set it aside and wait for it to become clearer, which is not always the right response, especially when what I should be doing is asking a direct question. I set things aside when I should have asked. This is what I'm telling you about. The first time I heard Derek's name was in November. Claire mentioned him in the context of a freelance project she'd taken on outside the studio. She did occasional outside work, always cleared it with her employer, nothing unusual. A friend of a friend needed a brand identity package for a new business, and the friend of a friend turned out to be Derek Holt, who was apparently starting an outdoor gear consulting company. She mentioned it over dinner in a factual way, the way she mentioned professional things, and I said, "That's cool. What kind of consulting?" And she explained, and I listened, and we moved on. He came up again in December. The freelance project was going well, she said, and Derek had been happy with the initial concepts. She mentioned that he was in his mid-30s, had moved to Boise about a year ago from Salt Lake City, worked in the outdoor industry, which in Boise was a significant industry, knew a lot of people she knew peripherally through the design community. She said this in the way of providing context about a client, nothing more. The context was accurate as far as it went. What I didn't know at the time was that Derek Holt had not always been a client or a professional contact. What I didn't know until later, much later, was that Claire and Derek had dated for 8 months in 2019, before we met, when she'd been living in Salt Lake City briefly, and before she'd moved to Boise. What I didn't know was that the move to Boise, which Derek had made approximately a year before she mentioned him at dinner, had not been entirely independent of the fact that she lived here. I didn't know any of this until she told me. She told me the night everything came out, which was too late for the information to be useful in the way information is supposed to be useful. In January, the phone shifted slightly. I'm going to say this directly. Claire had always been easy with her phone around me, the way people are easy with their phones when they have nothing to manage. What changed in January was a calibration, slight, not dramatic, the kind of thing you feel before you can name it. The phone stayed in her hand a little more, face down on the table when it had previously faced up, locked when she set it down when it had previously not been. I noticed and I set it aside because I coach football and I'm not naturally a person who interrogates subtlety, and because everything was plausible, and because I'd just proposed to this person and she'd said yes before the sentence was finished and her hands had been shaking. In February, she started going to the gym on weekend mornings. This was new. She'd always been active, ran regularly, did yoga sometimes, but the structured Saturday and Sunday morning gym routine was new in February, and she mentioned it as a resolution, a goal she'd set for the new year that she was finally following through on. I said, "That's great," and I meant it. I didn't go with her because I had my own training I was doing and our schedules didn't align and there was no reason they needed to. In February, she had 4 Saturday morning gym sessions. She had 3 Sunday morning ones. She came home from all of them in the particular way of someone who has had a good morning, warm, present, talking easily. The energy of those returns was consistently and noticeably good. I told myself this was the gym. I told myself exercise does that, makes people feel good, produces the specific brightness of someone who has moved their body and is happy about it. I ran this interpretation and I accepted it because it was plausible and because I was in the middle of spring football and because there is a version of me that will choose the comfortable interpretation when the comfortable interpretation is available. March was the rooftop and the ring and the yes and the shaking hands. March was also the month something happened that I can only describe clearly in retrospect. Claire, in the weeks after the proposal, was the happiest I'd seen her in months. Not engagement happy, though that was real too, but more broadly, more deeply, more lit than I could fully account for from the ring alone. I noticed this and I told myself it was the engagement. I told myself that's what saying yes does to a person. I had no experience with proposing to someone before this, no baseline to compare against, and I accepted the explanation I was given. In retrospect, the weeks around the proposal were the weeks when she was seeing Derek most frequently. I know this now. At the time, I was planning seating charts for a spring football banquet. The first time I had something I couldn't explain away was in early April. Terrell, my assistant coach, the one who'd been asking every Monday whether I'd proposed yet, mentioned offhand that he'd seen Claire at a coffee place on Grove Street on a Thursday evening. He'd been there with his wife, they'd been getting dessert after dinner, and he'd spotted Claire at a table with a guy he didn't know. He mentioned it the way you mention something that has no significance. Oh hey, saw Claire last Thursday at Necker, she looked good. And then something in my face must have moved because he said, "You know where she was Thursday?" I had known where she'd told me she was Thursday. She'd said she was having dinner with her co-worker Fatima, a regular thing they did, not every week, but often enough to be established. I said yeah. Yes, she mentioned she might swing by there, and I moved on to the play we were discussing. But on the drive home I thought, she didn't mention Necker. She said Fatima's. And Necker is a coffee and dessert place, not a dinner spot. And Terrell said he saw her in the evening with someone he didn't know. And I thought about Derek Holt, the name that had appeared in November, the brand identity project, the outdoor gear consulting, the move from Salt Lake City to Boise about a year ago. I set it aside. I told myself there were 100 explanations. I told myself Terrell might have misidentified her or misremembered the night. I told myself I was looking for things and finding them because I was looking, not because they were there. I set it aside and I worked on the spring season and I kissed my fiancée and looked at the ring on her finger and I chose the comfortable interpretation one more time. The specific mundane moment. I was watching film in my office at the school on a Thursday afternoon in April. Just film. Our last regular season game from the previous fall. The kind of work I do in the off-season when the game itself isn't happening, but the preparation is. And I was marking patterns in the defensive formation we'd faced. The specific repetitive work of building a catalog of what to expect and how to counter it. And my phone buzzed on the desk with a text from Claire saying she was going to be home late, dinner with Fatima running long. I looked at the text. I looked at the film paused on my laptop. I thought about Terrell at Necker on a Thursday evening with a guy he didn't know. I thought about the gym mornings and the phone and the name that had appeared in November. I thought about all of it assembled together, the full inventory that I'd been refusing to let assemble. And then I thought, I'm a coach. When the evidence accumulates on the defensive side, you adjust the play. You don't keep running the same call when the coverage has changed. I closed my laptop. I sat in my office for a while. And then I drove home, and Claire was back at 9:15, and she said the dinner had been great. Fatima sent her love, and I said I was glad, and I smiled at my fiancé, and I set it aside one final time. 3 weeks later, the hotel email came. I want to describe the process of reading that email completely because each detail arrived with its own weight, and I processed them in sequence. The hotel, a nice one on Capitol Boulevard, the kind of place that has a rooftop bar and room service and thread counts that people mention. Not the kind of place you stay when you're visiting Boise for business and watching the budget. The kind of place you book when the stay is the occasion. The dates. Thursday, April 17th through Friday, April 18th. Thursday to Friday. A Thursday when Claire had texted me that she was out with Fatima. A Friday when she'd come home at noon and said she'd taken a half day because the week had been long. The loyalty account. Hers. She had a travel rewards account from a period when she'd done more work travel. She'd told me about it when we were first together, mentioned she had points accumulated that she'd never used. The account was hers. The email confirmation was hers. And the email had come to the shared laptop because somewhere in the settings chain the shared iCloud had become the notification destination and neither of us had noticed. 2 nights. 420 points. I went to my phone. I went back through April in my text with Claire. Thursday, April 17th. Running late with Fatima, don't wait up. I had texted back a thumbs up. I had not waited up. I had gone to bed and she had come home, and I had been asleep, and in the morning she had been there next to me, and I had not known that she had been somewhere else for the night, and had come back early enough that I wouldn't realize it. The architecture of it. The specific structure required to pull that off. I was sitting in our kitchen thinking about the planning involved. I closed the laptop. I sat there. And then I did the thing I should have done 6 weeks earlier and 4 weeks before that. I picked up my phone and I called her. She answered on the second ring. She was at work. She said, "Hey, everything okay?" I said, "Can you come home early today?" A pause. Is something wrong? I need to talk to you. Come home when you can. Another pause. Longer. Will. Come home, Claire. She came home at 2:30. She came in the door, and I was sitting at the kitchen counter. The same place I'd been sitting when the email came. The same counter, the same laptop now closed. And she looked at me, and she set her bag down slowly. I opened the laptop. I turned it toward her. The email was still on the screen. She looked at it. She looked at me. And she sat down. I want to be accurate about the confrontation because accuracy is something I owe myself at this point. She sat across from me and she looked at the email, and then she looked at her hands, and she was quiet for a long enough time that I said her name. Claire, I know what this looks like. Then tell me what it is. She pressed her palms flat on the counter. I need you to, she stopped. I need you to let me say the whole thing before you. Who was in the room? She looked at the email. Derek, the name. The name from November, from the freelance project, from the client context she'd given me over dinner like a professional briefing. Derek Holt, outdoor gear consulting, Salt Lake City to Boise, mid-30s, moved here about a year ago. How long, I said. Since January. Since January. Yes. I did the math. January. February. March. The proposal in March. April, the hotel. We were in late April now. You were seeing him when I proposed, I said. She closed her eyes. Yes. You said yes. Will. I put a ring on your finger, and you were all ready. I know. Her voice cracked on it. I know. I don't have a way to say that isn't. Don't, I said. Don't manage the sentence. Just tell me why. She was quiet for a moment. He and I. She shook her head. We dated before. Before you. In Salt Lake. And when he moved here, I told myself it was just going to be the project. Just professional. And then we had coffee and she stopped. Something came back that I thought was over. You dated him before. 2019, 8 months. We ended when I moved here. And he moved here. Yes. A year ago. Yes. I looked at the kitchen. The kitchen she'd made look the way it looked. The walls she'd chosen the color of. Did he know about me when this started? I said. Yes. Does he know you're engaged? She looked at the counter. Claire. Yes. He knew. And he was fine with. He wasn't fine with it. She looked up. Her eyes were wet. He pushed me to tell you. He said he didn't want to be. She stopped. He said either I tell you, or we stop. But you didn't tell me. I kept thinking I was going to end it. I kept telling myself one more time, and then I'd end it. And then the proposal happened and you said yes anyway. The silence. Did you want to say yes? I said. Or did you want to say something else, and you didn't? She looked at me for a long time. I wanted to say yes, she said. I love you. That's real. What I'm telling you right now is not. She shook her head. This doesn't cancel that. I know it feels like it does. But the yes was real. And the hotel was also real. Yes. I stood up. I walked to the window. The canyon view, the rim rock in the afternoon light, the chair she'd positioned to catch the light over your left shoulder. Are you in love with him? I said. The silence lasted long enough. I don't know, she said. I've been trying to figure out what I feel for weeks, and I don't have a clean answer. Is it over between you? I said. I told him after the proposal. I told him I needed. Is it over? I thought it was, she said. And then April happened. The hotel. Yes. I turned around. I looked at the ring on her hand. The ring I'd carried in my coat pocket for 6 weeks. The ring she'd said yes to while this had been happening. I need you to take that off, I said. She looked at her hand. She looked at me. I'm not saying forever, I said. I'm saying right now. I need you to take it off, and I need you to call someone, and I need to be in this apartment. She removed the ring. She set it on the counter between us. She looked at it for a moment, and she said, I'm sorry. I know that's nothing, but I'm sorry. I looked at the ring on the counter. Call someone, I said. Please. She called her sister. She packed a bag. She left. I sat at the kitchen counter with the ring in front of me until it got dark. Then I put it in the drawer where we kept things like extra keys and batteries and objects with no permanent home, and I went and sat in the chair by the window, and I looked at the canyon until I couldn't see it anymore. I'm writing this 5 days later. I'm still sitting with it. I don't know yet what comes next. I said I'd come back. Here it is. The response was more than I expected from a post I wrote mostly to put something somewhere outside my own head. I read through the comments across several nights. Some were useful. Some were angry in the way that strangers' anger can feel like solidarity when solidarity is what you need. One person wrote, The detail about carrying the ring in your coat pocket for 6 weeks while she was already seeing him is the most painful thing I've read on this subreddit. I've been thinking about that since because the detail is accurate, and because I've been thinking about those 6 weeks, the pocket, the weight of it, the timing I was so careful about, and trying to figure out where the information I was missing would have fit if I'd had it then. Here's what happened. Claire has been at her sister Bree's apartment in the Bench neighborhood for 17 days. Bree is 28, has lived alone since finishing grad school, and apparently received Claire with the specific decisiveness of a younger sister who has strong opinions and is not afraid to hold them. I know this because Claire mentioned it in one of our conversations, that Bree had been clear about where she stood, which apparently meant not neutral. I've always liked Bree. I've been trying to hold that as a separate thing from the rest of it, and it has been imperfectly successful. The apartment on Crescent Rim is mine. The lease has always been mine. Claire moved in 2 years ago, and the practical reality of the housing situation is uncomplicated even when nothing else is. She took what she needed and left the rest, and I've been living in the apartment with the furniture she'd arranged and the walls she'd painted and the chair positioned in front of the window, and the specific presence of her decisions in a space that no longer contains her is something I've been going through room by room, deciding what it means and what to do about it. I told Terrell. I called him the Sunday after everything came out, because Terrell had been the one who'd seen them at Necker in April and had mentioned it, and I'd told him I knew about it when I hadn't, and that mattered to me in a way that needed to be addressed. He answered, and I gave him the general outline, and he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You said you knew about the coffee place." I said, "I didn't know. I just said that." He was quiet again. "Okay," he said. "What do you need?" "That's Terrell. That's been Terrell for 7 years. He came over on Tuesday with food he'd made at home, and we watched the NFL draft, and he didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer, and he texted me every day for the first 2 weeks with the specific low-pressure regularity of someone who is making sure you know you're not alone without requiring anything from you. My parents found out when my mother called on a Thursday evening, which is the evening she calls, and I told her because not telling her when she called and asked how I was would have required a performance I wasn't capable of. She asked one question, "What do you need?" and then listened to me for 45 minutes. And at the end, she said she'd drive up from Twin Falls if I wanted her to, and I said not yet, and she said the offer stood. My father got on the line briefly at the end, said my name, said, "You're going to be okay, son." 4 words. The complete architecture of how my father expresses care, and it was exactly enough. Claire's parents. Her mother sent me a text 3 days after everything came out. 2 sentences. She said she loved me, and she was sorry. I texted back that I appreciated it and meant it, and we left it there. Her father, from what I understand, has been significantly less neutral about the situation than the text suggested, which Claire mentioned with a specific tone of someone receiving a consequence they'd known was coming. The complication nobody predicted, Derek Holt reached out. He messaged me on Instagram. My account is public because parents follow it for football updates, and I haven't thought about it as a privacy concern until now. The message was 5 sentences. He said he'd known about me from the first week of January, when Claire had told him she was seeing someone. He said he'd pushed her to be honest with me, had told her multiple times that he wasn't willing to be the thing she was hiding. He said he'd ended it from his side in late March, before the proposal, he said, before he knew the proposal was happening, and that April had been Claire's doing, that she'd contacted him and he'd made a choice he regretted. He said he was telling me because he thought I deserved to know the sequence and because he didn't want me to have a wrong picture of what had happened. I read this message probably 10 times. I've thought about it almost every day since. I have not responded. I've thought about responding, and I come to the same place each time. I believe parts of it, and I'm uncertain about other parts, and there's no version of that conversation that gives me something I need badly enough to have it. He's 36. He moved from Salt Lake City to Boise with some portion of his reason being Claire, and whether the message is the whole truth or the truth arranged to his advantage, I can't fully know, and the uncertainty is its own thing I'm managing. What I've taken from the message, without responding to it, is that the sequence is more complicated than I'd understood in the initial confrontation. That doesn't change what happened. It just changes the shape of it, and I've been adjusting to the new shape. The mutual friends situation is the usual distribution. People who were primarily mine have been present. People who were primarily hers have appropriately receded. 2 couples who were shared. The The kind of mutual friends you accumulate over 2 years of being a unit, have handled it with varying degrees of grace. One couple reached out to me specifically and directly and has been present in ways that have mattered. Another went quiet in a way I've decided not to interpret. Terrell told the other assistant coach, which I'd expected he would, and which I'd tacitly given him permission to by telling him in the first place. The coaching staff has been the right kind of normal about it. Nobody makes it a topic. Everybody checks in briefly. The work continues because spring football continues, and the work is one of the things holding the structure of my days together right now. The inside of it. The first morning after Claire's things were gone. The real first morning, after the bag she'd taken had expanded into the full move. I lay in bed and ran the inventory. What day? What do I have? And then the weight of everything came back in the sequence it's been coming back in every morning since. The chair is still in front of the window. I've sat in it every evening because not sitting in it would make avoiding it into a thing, and I'm trying not to make avoidances into things. I sit in the chair and I look at the canyon and the rimrock and the specific Idaho light at the end of the day, and some evenings this is enough, and some evenings it isn't, and I've accepted that both of those are true without trying to correct for either. The ring is in the kitchen drawer, where we keep batteries and extra keys and objects without homes. I open that drawer occasionally for those things and I see it there, and I close the drawer. I've been trying to decide what the ring means now, whether it means something recoverable or something that's ended, and I haven't arrived at an answer yet. The drawer stays closed until I know. I found her work-from-home headphones in the closet about a week in. The good ones, the ones she'd bought when the studio went hybrid and she'd needed something better for calls. They were on the top shelf behind some things I'd forgotten were there, and I picked them up and held them. The specific weight and shape of something that belonged to a specific person, and put them in a bag with other things she'd left so they'd be in one place when I figure out the next step. There's a breakfast spot on Overland Road that we'd gone to most Sunday mornings since the first year, the kind of place that becomes yours through repetition, and that stops being a decision and becomes a given. I went last Sunday. First time. I sat at a table that wasn't the table we usually sat at, because I wasn't ready for that table, and I ordered what I always order, and I drank my coffee, and I watched Overland Road through the window, and I got through the hour, and I went home and I counted that as a small thing I'd done right. I still look at the ring on her finger when I think about her. Then I remember the ring is in the drawer. I've caught myself doing this 3 times in 3 weeks, the brain running the old image, the shaking hands and the yes and the light on the rooftop on 8th Street. The brain keeps loading the image it has. I'm waiting for it to update. Spring football has been useful in the specific way that demanding work is useful. It requires enough of you that the requiring crowds out some of the other things. And the hours on the field are the hours when I am completely the thing I know how to be, and being completely something is better than being partially everything. Terrell runs the defensive side of practice, and I run the offensive side, and we've been in a good rhythm with the new sophomore group, and the work is real, and it matters, and some days that's the most solid ground I have. Here is where I actually am. Claire and I have spoken 6 times since she went to Breeze. 3 logistics calls. 2 harder conversations. 1, 4 days ago, that was different from the others. In the hard conversations, she said things about our 2.5 years that I've been going through carefully. About the ways I set things aside when I should have pushed. About the quality of a relationship, where she'd sometimes felt like something to be managed rather than reached toward. About the gap between the way I showed up on the field and the way I showed up at home. She said all of it without weaponizing it, as honest account rather than as justification. She said, I'm telling you what was true for me. I'm not telling you it explains what I did. What I did is what I did. I've been trying to hold those 2 things as genuinely separate. The gap she described and the choice she made inside it. The first one I'm responsible for. The second one is hers. She told me, in the second hard conversation, that it was completely over with Derek. That she'd told him after the hotel, and meant it that time. That she'd spent the week since trying to understand how she'd gotten to a point where she'd said yes to a ring while already inside a thing she couldn't name clearly. And that she was working through it with a therapist, and that the working through was not comfortable but was necessary. The conversation 4 days ago was different because she asked a question she'd been not asking. She asked whether I thought there was something left to work with, or whether I'd already decided. She said she wasn't asking me to decide anything in the moment. She said she knew she had no right to expect anything, and that whatever I decided she'd respect. She said, I need to know if I'm hoping for something that isn't there. I'd rather know. I told her I didn't know yet. The honest answer. I told her the ring was still in the drawer and that I hadn't been able to decide what that meant. And she was quiet, and then she said, "Okay, I'll wait for you to know. I've started seeing someone on my own. A therapist named Dr. Sandra Oak who has an office on Bannock Street and who, in our first session, caught me describing everything analytically, the timeline, the evidence, the sequence of decisions, and said, I understand you like to build a framework first. What did you feel when you saw the email? I told her, and then she said, say it again, but slower this time. She's been good. I'm going back next week. She said something in our second session that I've been carrying. You coach young men to read what the defense is showing them and adjust. You didn't adjust here because you didn't want to read what was in front of you. That's not a coaching failure. That's a human one. The question is what you do with it next. I've been thinking about that. The read I didn't make. The comfortable interpretation I chose. The drawer with the ring in it. The canyon is still visible from the chair. The chair is still positioned to catch the light over your left shoulder. The light is the same light it always was. I don't know yet what I'm going to do with the ring. I'll know when I know. And I'm trying to hold that not knowing as its own honest place to be, rather than a failure to have arrived somewhere. She said yes before I'd finished asking the question, and her hands were shaking. And for 6 weeks I'd carried the ring in my coat pocket waiting for exactly the right moment. And I've been trying to figure out ever since whether the moment was right and the answer was true and the thing that came after was separate, or whether I was already holding the answer to a question she wasn't fully asking. Tomorrow, a man gets a call from his bank's fraud department about a charge he didn't make, and when he investigates, he finds his wife has a credit card he never knew existed, with 18 months of charges he was never meant to see.